So, hello all. So, if you've just joined, please still use the link to the Google Doc and answer the question whether you have tried to reuse data before. And if you have, then let us know how it went. And if you haven't, you can also share why not. And then I'm going to try sharing the screen now. So, hopefully, you'll see that. I'm just going to assume yes until someone, yes, thank you. So today we're going to be talking about reusing open data. And because we're basically the same trainers as level one, I'm Esther and Bosun will also join us today. I'm not going to go into a lot of introductions because hopefully you're already familiar with our names. What we'll do today is we'll talk a little bit about what data reuse is. So if you're now very confused trying to fill out that question about what is, have I already reused data or not, then hopefully that will be clarified. Then Bosun will tell us something about how you can collaborate with a data generator or a data reuse case study to give us some inspiration of why we would want to do this, why it's a good idea. And then I'll be talking about a couple of strategies for finding data that you can then reuse. But soon we'll go into how do you evaluate data quality. We might have a short break or a period for questions, depending on how the timing is. We have not done this workshop in this setting, so I have no clue how the timing will go. But we hopefully have time for a short break. And then we'll go into integratable reuse, focusing on licenses and data citation. So that's the plan for today's session, which will kick off with something about data reuse. So I don't want to discourage you immediately, but data reuse is quite a complex process because first you need to discover data that you can reuse, and then you need to be able to access it, and then you need to check whether it's trustworthy, relevant data, and you'll need to be capable of translating and recontextualizing this data, which is collected by others, so you don't have a lot of control over that, in order to apply that to your own purposes. So this is not necessarily easier than regenerating new data. And it's very important to do that without misinterpreting or misusing the reused data. And this is also where documentation of the original data plays an important part. And these explanations have been taken from an interesting publication called Factors Influencing Research Data Reuse in the Social Sciences. So if you want to learn more about that, please give that a read. So the benefits of data reuse. It can minimize costs associated with data collection because you don't have to set new things up in principle. You could just reuse something that is already existing. So that this could be minimal cost and time associated with data collection. And the data that you're reusing might also be of good quality because it might have been subjected to peer review because it's publicly available, or because it's publicly available, people also put more time and energy into making it reusable. Because in general, people don't want to just put things out there. They want to take good care of that and make sure that if their name is associated with it, it is not a messy data set, or at least we would hope so. Um, However, as already mentioned, there's some constraints if you are reusing data which is generated by someone else, which might have been generated under very particular circumstances to answer their very particular research questions. And so you'll need to keep in mind how well was the original study executed. And because you have no control over the data quality, that becomes a very important question. And some of this data might actually not be reusable by you because it's too specific and you can't apply that to your own research study. And then, as also mentioned, while it might minimize costs and time, it may still take additional work because you'll need to screen the data. You may need to reformat it for your own purposes. You need to check if there's any missing data. And also combining multiple data sources is quite complicated. So, so yeah, this in general, you can't just download a data set and then immediately apply it to your own purposes. You'll need to have a look at whether this is actually fitting your work and if the quality is good. But we'll go into all of that in a bit. For now, I want to hand the floor over to Bosun, who's going to tell you why this is a good idea.
So thanks, Esther. I have this use case, and it's about someone that I got a permission from that I can discuss about this use case. Is Dr. Alamu. He's a scientist that is based in Zambia. He works for IITA and is a plant health scientist. He did some research work and his data are found in, I think I did not write the URL correctly. It is data.iita.org. Somebody stumbled across that data on plant health relating to specific disease, and they are trying to do some additional work on that same specific kind of plant, precisely maize. And the work that Alamu has done is in the public domain. However, when they wanted to use his data set, they needed to get some minds behind what led to this data collection. What are the questions that were answered? And those one could only be provided by the data generator. That is the person that created the data set. As at that moment, I was still the contact person for research data in that institution. Email was sent to the central email system. I received it and I forwarded it to Alamu. Somehow they also find his email on the internet. They reached out to him too. And when we discussed, said, go ahead, let's see what will happen to these people that need to reuse your data. They had a meeting. And during the meeting, instead for them to only use Dr. Alamu's data sets, they requested that it should be part of their project. And this is a project that has some fundings. You could know what that means for Dr. Alamu. It means that he has some funds to support his own additional work and his interns that he was training. So that was how Dr. Alamu, with his data that is open outside, free to be reused, got additional projects to sustain him for some few more years. I think it's a 3 years project, I think so. And that's a good example of use case within Africa that we may consider. Now, so Esther?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So sometimes it indeed doesn't even make sense to not move on or not do the data reuse without contacting the original creator because they have the most insight of that data set, of course. Yeah, really nice story. Okay. So how can you find this data if you want to reuse it, other than finding people on the internet and contacting them? There's a couple of strategies that are described in a publication or tips for finding research data, which the following section is based on. So this is not necessarily our work, but Gregory et al. In 2018 published 11 quick tips on finding research data. That was also the reading that we assigned for this session. So if you haven't managed to get to it, no worries. But it's just for your information that I'm not going to go over all of the 11 tips. So things will be missing. So it will be good to go back to the original work to check this out. And it's very important to really think about how you're going to find research data, because this is increasingly difficult nowadays because we have more data available. So how do you find your needle in the haystack? How do you find the data that you want to use? And then when you find it, is it actually reusable? Because yeah, it might not necessarily be applicable to what you want to do. And it will be easier if the data has been shared in a fair manner. So fair, as you've learned in level 1, means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And well, we don't have a lot of time, so there's also some guidance by Utrecht University and the Turing Way, which will be helpful to yeah, to consider when you're trying to find data that you want to reuse. And so one of the first tips that they describe is what data and why. And so before you set out to find data, you'll need to have a clear view of what characteristics the data set must have in order for you to be able to use it and to fulfill your purposes. And so this can be dependent on what data format does the data need to be in, what spatial or temporal coverage does it need to have. Is this one country? Is it the continent? Is it the entire planet? Is it recently? Is it hundreds of years ago? Is it available for you to reuse? Is it generated by a particular author or research group that you trust and that you would like to reuse their data or collaborate with them? And so what we'll do for a couple of minutes is consider, if I want to reuse data, what type of data do I need for the research question and why? And we'll do that like level 1. So we'll use the Google Doc, and so I'll link it again. And if you scroll down a little bit, there should hopefully be, oh, I need to stop sharing for a bit. There should be a section. I'm not sure if you can still see my screen, but I'm scrolling down to the second page, which is what data do you need for your research question and why? And so if you're currently not working on any research, just use any previous research projects that you've been working on, or if you want to start a new project, this might be a nice idea to share it. And you can also add your name before your answer, just so that we know who is answering the question. I'll give you a couple of minutes and I'll shut up so that you can actually think about this.
So some people dropped off and came back. So for those, we are in the Google Doc answering the exercise question, which you could see on the screen.
Okay, I see the writing slowing down. So I think I'll move on to the next bit of the presentation. But then hopefully keeping the data set in mind that you've now described, that makes it easier to look at the rest of the presentation to see if there's anything that you can then use. Can I just, yeah. Okay, and if you haven't been able to add it to the Google Doc, you can still add it to the chat, or if you're watching the recording as well, you can go to the Google Doc link and then still add your answer there. Okay, so keeping your data set or your reuse purpose in mind, then you'll need to go and select the appropriate resources for you where you can find this data that you want to reuse. And so we, for example, already used fair sharing in the previous workshop. If you remember that, maybe you already know which resources you can use to find data. There's also readtreedata.org, which I think has been mentioned in several of the sessions, which you can use. You can also use web search engines such as Google Data. Colleagues could be helpful to provide you with resources, perhaps also in their research paper, in the data availability statement, or in the reference of research papers. You can also find resources. There are also two lists that are curated and maintained, and I hope you don't hear the background noise right now. Apologies. So two lists which are curated by NIH and Springer Nature, where they also recommend a couple of data repositories. So hopefully that inspires some trust if they're selected and curated. But you can use any of these resources basically to find resources that you can use to find more data. And so we'll move right into the next exercise. Which of these resources that are linked in the previous slide would be available or useful to you to find data? And perhaps if you only answer one thing, what would be the resource that you want to explore next? So which one seems of most interest? And so if we go back to the Google Doc, then I'll need to stop sharing this one again. We go into the Google Doc. If we scroll down again, so this should probably now, yeah, still be at the second page. Which of these resources, and it maybe perhaps you found something which is not on the slide as well. Please share, and then we can also learn from you. Where should we go to find data that we can reuse? And I also noticed an answer where data reuse is not super common. Hopefully the workshop on Friday will be a bit more relevant to you, but we will still today talk about a lot of the things that could make it easier for other people to reuse your data. So then maybe you can keep the other side of it a bit more in mind. Okay, I'll shut up now so that you can actually think about this. Okay, so I see typing is slowing down a bit. Please continue if you're still working on it. But I'm also seeing a question which maybe Bosun you can already answer, because Zoe is indicating that she's looking for information about, is it EI or is it AI? Maybe you can elaborate. Maybe we can answer that question.
I'm trying to get the question.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see my marked text here, but that's where I'm
Oh,
seeing the
sorry.
question.
I
No
was reading
worries.
the chat. I was checking the chat. Okay. Now I can see it.
But I'm not sure if the question is fully
The
fully
IA or
phrased to answer it. I'm not sure, but maybe you know better.
I want to be sure whether that is IA or AI.
Zoe,
Uh,
are you able? Yes.
Zoe, could you please unmute and let us know if you mean AI or IA? However, I think judging from her answer in the previous question, I think it's AI. Because she said that I had to find data for artificial intelligence
Yeah.
as
Good
a tool
call.
for finding information.
Yes, intelligence artificielle, excuse me.
No worries. No worries.
IE ou EI?
AI.
Yeah. I
Okay,
think it's the French version. Yeah.
thank you.
IT does not contain data on AI. I know, I'm in some forum in which, we have been looking at, can we trust AI data? And for now, everybody is saying the major thinking is that we cannot say AI data should be trusted for now. We still depend more on data generated by human. For instance, I can use my ChatGPT to create some data set for me to be used for projects. I've done that as an experiment, and I would say I did not trust it. I did that project with some other colleagues, other folks in the US, and so I don't really have a repository where you can say you are getting AI data sets. Or do I get what you are saying? Or are you talking about data related to AI?
I think so. So if it sounds like maybe that's not the best resource.
No, ITA is not the best. They create data related to agriculture and climatic conditions, including soil.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Then maybe the person who said I look to journals of agriculture, that might actually be a better target group. Yeah. I might be able to link some resources, but I don't want to do that right now because then I'm going to do a lot of screen sharing. So I'll try to do that in a bit. But I think for now, people are done typing their answers. So if we have no further questions, and I hope that answered the question. Otherwise, please let us know in the chat. And then we'll move on to the rest of the presentation. Okay. So back to this 11 quick tips for finding research data. So their third tip is about queries. And that is important if you've found the resource that you want to explore. It is important to consider what type of words, what type of keywords, what type of vocabularies, what type of subject categories do they use, so that when you use the search function in that resource, that you actually get what it is that you're trying to find. So that can be very important also to consider what type of keywords you're using in that search. And before you download all of the data from the resource that you found, it's important to first do a preliminary assessment. So just to check whether your data is relevant to your purpose, which we just did in step 1 or the first exercise. What data do you actually need? Before you put in more time and effort, and you might waste time. And so I already discussed documentation at the very beginning, but the documentation of the data can be very important in order to assess whether it's relevant for your purpose. So that can also mean that if there's no documentation, then it's nice that the data is there, but can you actually reuse it? Can you really say anything about it? So documentation is really key here. And for some of the research purposes that you have, you might need to think about whether your search results are adequate enough to discover all of the data sets that you need. And this is sometimes in literature also named systemic research or systemic search, etc. So if you need all of the data in order to address your research question, then you need to keep that in mind. If you just need some data to address the research question, then this is a less important. So keeping that in mind. No exercise this time. I think no exercises for this part. What is also important, tip 7, is to save whatever search you did and whatever data sources you found. So it can be important to go back to the original data source. So for that alone, it is important to record what you found, where you found it, ideally using this persistent identifier, such as a digital object identifier. So for example, the link to this presentation today, again, that's a persistent identifier. So keep that information somewhere. And it can also be important to save a copy of the original data, particularly if it doesn't have a persistent identifier. You might lose access to the original data. So save a copy and keep that somewhere safe, which then allows you to go back to the original data, even if websites are down, resources are canceled, etc. So this can be very important. And it's also very important to keep track of the resources that you are downloading and reusing in order to provide credit. We'll go back into that in the, not this slide, but the next slide. And so we discussed resources and data repositories, but sometimes it can be more helpful to look for data services. So the data best serving your needs might be provided as a service through an API. And so example of such services are the NSW Climate Data Portal or Google Earth Engine or Amazon Web Services public data sets. So it can also be that these types of resources are more of interest. And if you are working with a recurring search or a rich site summary or as feed, then you can also be automatically updated if any of these data sets are changed or updated. So this won't be applicable for everyone, but I thought it was nice to mention. Then 11, credits, giving things back to the original data generators. So if you're using a data set, you should give proper attribution to the data creators or owners. So we'll go back into that, how that works at the end of this session. And you can also provide feedback to either the data creators or the data repository if you experience any issues with downloading or reusing the data, or if it was a positive experience, then it's also good to share feedback. And that was the bit on strategies for finding data. So I'll pause here just to see if there's any questions on that before we move on to the next part.
I have a question. Okay, Aman, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll go next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. My question is related to data source, usually in terms of publication. For example, I wanted to use State Survey 2015, and even when you need to publish, even some authors like they may not be interested to review that because it's outdated data and something like that. That's an issue also. So, is there any good point to state the time frame to utilize that? Of course, the methodology is advanced, and the statistical package, the statistical analysis you use is innovative, and you may find innovative finding, but because of outdated or the time boundary, I have seen even this data is outdated, or we are on currently it's about 10 years, 9 years, something like that. And even in academic institution, hire for professors not also encouraged to use secondary data. As you mentioned before, the quality is depending on the primary data source. So that also encourage students to collect primary data. So how can we improve that? Yeah, because even currently, yes, we have several data sources, but they, enforce residents, students, and PhD students even to collect primary data, which is the small, and in terms of scale, it's very limited or small sample size and the like. So these are, the common challenges, especially in low and middle income countries, especially in Ethiopia as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think it will be difficult to give you one answer on that because it also depends on your research topic, right? So for some, if there's very limited data available, then even outdated data could be useful. But that depends really on the research topic. For some research topics, I can imagine that you don't want to work with outdated information, and then generating new data might be better instead of trying to make sense of older data that might not address the new question. So I am not entirely sure what your question about this is, but ideally we would encourage people to share data in a more reusable manner, which is also what we will go into on Friday. So that won't solve any of the immediate problems you might experience now, but hopefully in the future, if we can increase awareness of what it takes to share data that's actually reusable, it might solve some issues in the upcoming years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. Yeah.
Please also say if it doesn't make sense. Ernest.
Yes, please. Good morning. I would like to know if there are repositories for all the fields, and if there are, how can we get access to the links of the repositories?
Oh, I'm not sure if we have any global repositories or if that would even be possible. We'll go into that a little bit on Friday, what the benefits are of that. So for example, Zenodo is like a general repository. So in theory, you could find any resources from any discipline out there. But then it becomes the question, how reusable is that? Because Zenodo just it doesn't do any data creation. It doesn't work with any specific vocabularies. So because it's so general, it won't apply to very specific purposes. So there's ups and downsides to both of those. Maybe Bosun, if you want to elaborate further.
I think you said it. I've not seen one. Although you can go through Google dataset, which is dataset search.research.google.com. And you may specify your thematic or discipline. It could help. That's the only one that I can think about. And also, the shortcoming of this Google dataset is that if the repository that is hosting the data you're looking for is not indexed, then you won't find it. So just like Esther said, I'm not sure I can give you a valid response to that. But you can try the Google. I've shared the link in the chat.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and just as a reminder for the so on this slide, there's a couple of resources where you can find either general or discipline specific resources. So that's tip or step 2. So just this is where you'll be able to find that, hopefully find that information. Okay, I think that is answering the raised hands and the questions in the chat.
I just have a small
Yeah.
question. If, for example, talking from my experience, like the data I need, I usually find it in like the supplementary materials of research papers. Is it ethical, for example, for me to take this data and deposit it on a repository? Like giving, of course, giving attribute that these are the people who made the data, or like this has to be done by the creator of the data, knowing that like the people publish the data openly, like in open access. So yeah.
That's a very good question. And this is actually why we shouldn't use supplementary data to publish data, because it's actually difficult to say whether the license of the publication also applies to the supplementary materials. And so if there's no license associated with the supplementary materials, then you can't just use that data and put it somewhere, because then you don't have those reuse rights. So that makes it very difficult to put it somewhere else. And in general, I would, if this is something that you would like to do, I would actually recommend you to contact the authors to do this themselves. Because, yeah, I see Bosun unmuting. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just agreeing with you. You need to contact the author before you can do anything. I'm totally agreeing with you.
Yeah, because in theory, if it's under a CC BY license, so any publications under a CC BY license, you're also allowed to just share anywhere as long as you link to the original resource. But then if we have 10 places where the same publication is findable, then that might be a bit too much. I think 2 places or 3 places are good, just in case services are down, etc., things are disappearing. But having that everywhere in 10 to 20 different versions might overwhelm the system further. And I think I saw a thumbs up, so I think that answered the question. Yeah, okay. All right, then hopefully those were all the questions for this part of the workshop. So then we'll move to your part.
Thank you. So this part, we
Yes.
just
Edouard. Okay.
Ernest,
Okay.
I think it's just when mute him, no worries.
Okay, thank you. So we will be looking at evaluating data quality. When you need to reuse data, how to ensure the quality of this data. So the importance of data quality in research. These are part of what we have discussed in our past discussions. Its impact on research outcomes. If your research, I don't know how much we know about data curation. When you have data sets that are really large and you have what is called outliers, you did not try to identify where the errors are and you start your analysis. Remember, your analysis is what you are going to use in your publications. So any error that is in your data, which is not properly identified or treated or removed, you are going to carry it into your research and your publication eventually will carry that error. So how poor data quality affects research findings, we need to find about it. Then we're talking about reproducibility to ensure research can be replicated. Additionally, compliance and standards, meeting industry standard and academic standards when we are doing our data reuse. Next slide. Thanks, Esther. So when we are evaluating data quality, the steps below are important. Number one, definition of your data quality requirements. Two, profiling it, talking about the data quality assessment itself, data curation and transformation, the implementation of data quality rules, the rules that governs data quality implementation. Then you talk about the validation of your data and then verifying it. The documentation of issues that you encounter in the process of carrying out data quality assessment or check is important. Then data quality reporting. Continuously, you need to continue. So let's just look at what I have here in the next few minutes, in a couple of minutes. Yeah. Number one, when we are defining our data quality requirements, we need to identify our stakeholders to determine who will use this data and what their requirements are. If you are churning out the data, do you want people to access it? If you want to reuse it, what you are reusing this data set, who are those that will be consuming it in the future? Then you set the data quality dimensions. What we call dimensions are the aspect of data quality that are most important in terms of the accuracy, in terms of the completeness, the consistency, the timeliness, validity, the uniqueness, and integrity. In fact, that is what holds your data. That is the dimension that you can use to say, this data is reliable, I can go ahead with it. Number two is data profiling. You need to understand the data structure. What do we mean by this? Analyze the structure of the data to understand the schema. Let me come down a bit. There are different types of data. We have some that are genomic. We have geodata. We have socioeconomic data. So you need to understand the structure of your data. When you are dealing with genomic data or phenotypical type of data, they can be in megabytes or gigabytes. Socioeconomy could be just in kilobytes. You have to understand the structure, how these data are, the types of data that they have, and their relationships. You must assess the data content. What is the content that you are looking at? Remember what Esther told us, that you need to first know what kind of data you want to reuse before you start to download it. So you have to assess the content, examine the data content to identify the patterns, the distributions, and then the anomalies. So you identify the data source also. Here, you have to document where the data comes from and how it is collected. You are expected to put that down. So this is taken from NIH or it's taken from retrieve data, blah, blah, blah. You need to indicate it. The data quality assessment, I've mentioned this briefly. Let me run through them. In assessing your quality, you need to look at the accuracy, check for errors in that data, the values. Where you are supposed to have numbers, do not have strings. What I call strings are something like words, special characters. If you are supposed to have words, don't put numbers there. So ensure that your data is complete. All the fields that are required, they are there. Then consistency. Verify that the data is consistent across different data sets and systems. For instance, you may be using different health data. Make sure that you are consistent, not that you are using health data and along the line, you mix in socioeconomic data into it. That should be consistency, and then timeliness in terms of ensuring data is up to date and relevant at the time of use. Somebody is using annotation. And then validity of what you have. Ensure that it conforms to the expected formats and rules. The uniqueness to eliminate duplicates. It is very, very common to have duplicates when you are reusing data. It is possible for you to copy and paste, and when you copy and paste, you paste twice, your data will be duplicated. This is very common. Make sure your data is unique, and don't compromise the integrity of your data to ensure that the relationship between each entities are maintained correctly. Yes, the next slide. Then data curation and transformation. When data curation is the cleaning of your data. Then transformation is when you change it from the raw format into something different. You could use a lot of queries, softwares, tools to do that. Ensure you correct the errors. Fix any inaccuracies, any typographical errors, ensure you correct them. Then use standardized formats. Ensure that data is in a consistent format. For instance, if you want to use date, we can use, I'm just giving an example this time now, year, month, day. Your year could be YYY, months could be YYY, I mean MMM or MM, and they could be DD. If you want to choose any format, make sure you put it there and you explain the format in your README file. Remember, in our first level, we talk about the README file. You explain that this is the standardized format that I'm using. And when you are using addresses too, for instance, geospatial data, when you collect data in specific location, assuming you are using 5 decimal places, 3 decimal places, make sure you explain and justify this is the format that I'm using. Then handling missing data. Sometimes you have some data that will be missing. For instance, if you collect data with ODK, ODK stands for Open Data Kit, which is just an app that can collect data offline. And once you have internet, it can synchronize with your server. So if you collect it, I've seen people that they have missed data in the past, so it is possible. We are not saying it is not possible, but how do you ensure you handle it? So you through method like imputation, interpolation, or by removing the incomplete record. Then remove duplicates. Identify and remove duplicates to ensure uniqueness. It's like I'm repeating what I said before. And then we call something normalization when you are transforming data. You try to make your data to be in a standardized format for comparison and analysis. That means that your headers, the headers for your row, for your columns, you want to standardize the one that you are reusing and the one that you are collecting so that it will be easier to compare and contrast. Then implement data quality controls. You put in controls to check that your data meets what you want. You define the rules, try to put in checks. Sometimes we call something VLOOKUP. And then you monitor continuously to ensure that those that are working with you, your interns, they are not altering your data. And that is why what Esther told us earlier about keeping your original copy is important. That is going to be your reference point to ensure that you still have the quality data that you are starting with or that you want to achieve. Then number 6, the data validation and verification. If you miss anything, do not miss the validity, confirming the validity of your data. Check that the data meets the defined quality criteria. There are rules that will be created for the kind of data that you want to collect. If you are collecting human data, you know that you are not supposed to expose personally identifiable information. in GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation in the Europe, you cannot even afford to mess with that. In Africa now, according to the AU convention and regulation that they had some 7 years ago, many countries are also adopting it. So ensure that when you are having any data, that validation is put in place and then verify again. That is, you are checking again what has been validated. I think this last slide now. Yeah, the last slide. So document data quality issues. We are saying that having an issue is not an issue. It becomes an issue when you do not document. So we are saying that document everything that you encounter in the process of setting up your data quality control. Then track whatever you use to address it. Have a record for it. The reason is that this data set that you are working on, there may be similar issue in the future. So you have where you can reference, then update documentation. Whatever you have done, keep a record of it. Now, this could be boring, but in the future, you will have a place to refer to. You can also share this kind of information with your research data management team if you have one, or put it in your README file. It depends on how you want to manage it. In data quality reporting, ensure you report if you are writing for a project as a student, you do that. If it's an intern on a project that you have other teams working with you, in Africa, we have a lot of EU-funded projects that involve several countries. So in this kind of project, we generate reports on what are the challenges that we have. So, and you have to visualize data quality using dashboard visualization tools. We have a lot of tools that you can use for your quality. There is a software called Kibana. It's open source partially. You can use it if you can't afford to pay for Tableau. That's just an example to check your data quality. Then continuous improvement. Keep on giving feedback, check your data. If you feel that what you have done is not okay, you refine your process and then train the staff, the interns, those that are working with you. So next slide. Thanks, Esther. So now, all these that we have said, so sweet, there will be challenges. Yeah. So some of the challenges that we always encounter is inconsistent data formats. And sometimes the data that you want to reuse may not be complete, or there may not even be any standards. So the best practice is ensure you document, automate as much as you can with softwares like Python tools, and then collaborate. The person that creates that data, collaborate with the person, and you can get better results. So the last slide. So I have a use case, but I will not be going through it again. I mean, I wanted us to, which I did not share. I mean, I wanted us to compare health data and animal or plant data to see how they differ. And when we are talking about health data, what I want to bring out is this. For health data, you are going to see, for human health, you see information that are related directly to human beings. For instance, if it's checking diseases, you can see the gender, you can see the name, you can see the blood pressure. Those are personal information to people. And not everybody likes that one being shared or made public. But when it comes to health, even if they give the plant's name, the plant location, the plant kind of disease, the plant cannot come and argue with you and say, why are you putting my information out there? So the kind of quality control you ascribe to health data, human health, is higher compared to my plant, nature, or non-human data. That is all what I want to bring out from the use case. But I can tell us there is no time for that again today. Esther? Now, our exercise. there is this file that we have been sent the link before in the Slack. I hope we got it. Thanks, Esther. We want to identify what makes it difficult to reuse this data. So we are going to go to our Google Docs. The links have been shared in these slides. I mean, in this Zoom. We are going to the Google Doc. So download that file from Figshare. And let's look at it. You need to tell us what are the things that you identify that you think will make this data not the best format to use. Let me use that language. Yeah.
I'm just checking because I also opened it just in case people cannot open it.
Oh,
Do you see an Excel sheet, or do you just see the redirecting you to the data, the web browser?
We see the redirecting you.
Yeah, let me reshare. Okay, so hopefully if you can't download it, then hopefully you see the example here. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to look at it and then to indeed add to the Google Doc why you might not want to reuse this.
can I drop it here? That's the file.
Yeah, that's indeed also possible.
So you can go to the Google Doc and tell us why this is not the best file for you to use. Why is it going to be difficult to reuse that data? Yes, we have good responses.
If you can't open the file, then hopefully you can. I'm still sharing my screen. Hopefully, let me know because I'm also trying to look up things. So if it changes or switches, let me know. But then you can just hopefully look at the shared screen and still answer the questions why you might not want to reuse this.
And if you click on the Tanzania also, the second sheet, they have the same family.
Good point.
I'm not seeing us typing again.
Yeah, maybe people are struggling trying to open the file.
Okay.
Do we need more time?
Yeah. Do you want me to reach? I can send the physical copy again to this chat room.
Yeah, if it helps. Can't hurt.
Yeah.
I think the confusion that happened is, including me, like we answered this question in response to, like in connection to the previous questions, not in relationship to the data set. So maybe this is just for everyone. Like I think most of us answered the question of what makes it difficult to use this data in relation to the previous question, as we thought it was a continuation. But this question, we actually have to answer it in response to the data that Esther is showing on the screen.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah.
No worries.
And all of the answers based on the data sets you were keeping in mind, or in general for data reuse, those are also very good. So yes, all very valid points.
So we are having some points in the chat. And Musa, I mean, would you mind if you can put that in the Google Doc as well as Modesta somewhere?
Yeah, I'm copy pasting the answers also to the Google Doc. So feel free
Thanks.
to put it in the chat or in the Google Doc.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, Hoji, you can please go ahead. So why do we think this data set that we are using is difficult to reuse?
So Tony, you can answer in the chat.
Yes.
You're welcome to write it in the chat.
Yeah, you're also welcome to share via voice, Aminu.
Yeah,
Aminu?
thank you. For me, the data set, the one that is being shown currently,
Yeah.
majority of the variable, they are string format. It will not give me room for any statistical manipulation or arithmetical manipulation. So they have to be changed to numeric formats.
Yeah, good point.
Very good one. Thank you very much. There are so many. There are so many, and we are writing them. Data is not consistent. Use yes, why, no, and so there's no consistency, all right? You will notice that, okay, let me allow you to.
Okay, I think typing is slowing down, so maybe we can indeed just summarize that this
Yes,
data set is not very user friendly for all of the reasons that you've listed. Even just downloading it seems to be problematic. So yeah, that's important for you to be able to assess the data set. You need to be able to actually access it. Yeah, it's not organized consistently. It's not one variable, one point of information per Excel, or what is it, per cell. And there's, yeah, it's very inconsistent. There's also multiple tables in one tab, tabs all over the place. It's very difficult to compare Mozambique and Tanzania because it's arranged in different formats. Yeah, not great. There's also some color coding. If you export this format, it might also disappear. So then this information is lost. So that's also not good. Are we missing this? This feels this is they really set this up as a not reusable messy data set. So it feels like a bit terrible to bash this, but this is this is not we're not hurting anyone with this. They did this on purpose. So yeah, normally if you communicate feedback to people trying to improve this, you'll be a bit more constructive. Let's see if I can just show how it would look like if it's a little bit more organized. So what would be a good example to actually, I have all the windows open. It's very, I think I put it, yeah. Okay, so hopefully I'm still sharing the screen.
yeah, we can still see your screen. Now look at a more consistent one. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, so here it's at least, it's one table. So that makes it easier to compare things. So it's also not in two tabs anymore. It's all together. And I think at somewhere they should specify which country the data is from. I guess they just leave it at the village level, and from there you should be able to. I would add the country information here somewhere as well, because I'm not familiar with this context, so I'm not sure where the village god is situated. But if you're more familiar, that might make it easier to reuse. And here they also say null whenever there's a missing value. So you just know it's null. It's not zero. It's not empty. You don't have to guess. It's just not recorded. This is an interesting. So this looks a little bit more reusable because it's easier to compare if all of these variables are arranged like this. So it's easier to compare column 3 with column 5 because all of the information is structured in the same way. Okay, I think for the sake of time, we're gonna move on unless there's questions about this.
I was wondering if we could have access to the like organized version so that we can put it on the folder as an example of a good and a bad data set.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I thought it would be a bit easier to just screen share it because we all had some issues trying to access it. But then hopefully if you have a bit more time, and then indeed if you're also able to share it later, then that hopefully makes it a bit easier to download things. Good point. Okay. Then I'll move a bit quicker to the next part because we only have 10-ish minutes left. We keep falling into this trap where we want to share too much stuff with you. So I'll go over this. I think we'll skip this exercise, but you can do that in your own time. But we'll move to integrable reuse. So once you found a data set that is not as messy as the previous one, and you can actually reuse it, how do you ensure that you're reusing it in a proper manner? So how do you ensure that there's no harm, no misinformation from the data reuse? How do you ensure that you provide credits and sufficient documentation about what you did with reusing the data set? So Bosun already explained that a bit. How do you follow any requirements placed on the data reuse? So that can be licenses, which we discussed also in level 1. And how do you follow any legal or ethical requirements? So as Bosun already highlighted, you should do plant data, not human data, because then there's less requirements on it. But yeah, legal and ethical requirements are very much tied to sensitive data. So we'll go a little bit into that. And so for all of the data types, if you're reusing any data, it's important that you provide attribution and that you cite the data for reuse. So in your documentation, you'll need to include what that data has been reused and what data has been collected or generated by you, if that's the case at all. So it needs to be clearly identifiable what data is coming from where, what the context is, what the provenance of the data is. And so you can include that information in the research article, so clearly state which data has been reused using citations or in the data availability statement. If you're sharing a data set, that's also where that information needs to be in. So that could be in the tabular data itself that you already indicate the source, or it could be in the README file that you share with the data set. As long as it's clear where things are coming from, it's good. And it's really important to actually cite reuse data formally, because if you don't do that, people are able to find the data, but the original data creator will not receive official credits for this. So this is also with research articles. The citations is where it starts to count for the metrics. And so the same is true for data sets. If you don't cite them, the reuse becomes less visible and the original data creators, or in the image, it's about code. Same for code. If you're reusing any software, any previous software, any libraries, etc., it's important to cite that because otherwise the people sharing all of these wonderful resources are not getting the incentives to actually share it, right? You also want rewards for sharing things, I suppose. So how do we do that? How do you cite data? This is very similar to how you cite a research article. Oh, I see the text is slightly behind the image. It normally includes the following information. So the author, the title, the year of publication, the publisher. So in general, this is not the journal, but the data repository where you found the data set. You can include the version. So sometimes data sets only have one version, then it's less important. But sometimes they're big data sets and they have multiple versions. And then if you use the particular version, it's really important to cite exactly that version so that people can go back to that version of the data set and they don't have to search through 20 versions to figure out which one you have used. And it's also important to include the access information, so a URL, but preferably this persistent identifier, so a DOI, for example. Then, what is a data availability statement? I already mentioned this before, but this is a section in research articles, just like the acknowledgements, where you can clarify where the data is, why, where it's shared, or why it cannot be shared, etc. So here, if you reuse multiple data sets, this is the space where you can explain in more detail which data sets have been reused, and you can also include the citations to those sources. So for example, there's one example in this slide where I explain the data is available in the tables as well as in a data set on 4TU Center for Research Data, which is the repository. And then I also cite that resource and I provide the persistent identifier with it, just so that you can immediately see where is this available. But I also cite the original resource. And so the text is another example. So the data that support the findings of this study are openly available in repository name, and then you add the persistent identifier. But if you're reusing data, it's really important to include references to all of the reused data sources. So these are not, of course, not the only examples. You can basically write this on your own. You don't really need to follow a template. But if you want to make use of some more data availability statements, the Turing Way has a couple of examples which you can use for inspiration. And then we go back to licenses, which we already discussed in level 1. So licenses, just with the supplementary materials, if they don't have a license, then you actually can't reuse it for all the purposes that you would like to, because you need to go back to the original authors to actually ask them for permission to do any of the reuse. So if it doesn't have a license, it doesn't mean it can just be reused. It's actually the opposite. And if it does have a license, it's a formalized agreement of what researchers, of what reusers can do with the data and software that they're finding. So data and software have different licenses, and if there's indigenous data involved or indigenous communities, there's also traditional knowledge licenses, TK licenses. So it's a bit of a repeat of what we did in level 1. So for the data, there's the Creative Commons license chooser that you've hopefully used in level 1 to find your license. So I don't want to go into too much detail right now. And for software, that's the same. There's or similar, not exactly the same because software is a bit more complex, but this session is about open data, so I think I can skip this a little bit. But just so that you have the resources to find what restrictions are placed upon the data and software that you're finding. So if it's under a particular license, then you need to follow those license restrictions. And then for sensitive data, this is another level of requirements that you need to fulfill for very good reasons. We don't want sensitive data to just be publicly available on the street for multiple reasons. So this may be under restricted access. And this is where you can try to contact the data owner to explain what it is that you want to do with the data and discuss these conditions and legal restrictions with the data owner so that you can ensure that the data reuse is done in an integrable and ethical manner. And sometimes it's not possible to reuse sensitive data. So, for example, in Europe, sometimes you require consent for a gathering of sensitive data. And if this consent has been given for a very restrictive purpose, then it might not be possible to reuse the same data for a very different purpose. So it can be quite complicated to reuse sensitive data. But there's also a lot of case studies where, they try to share it as openly as possible. And it can also be very important to do that because there's only limited data available. So whatever data is available is very valuable. But yeah, we need to keep this in mind because it's very important that this data is collected ethically. And then I am not sure what time it is, but I think we don't have time for this exercise. But this is something that you can always do in your own time. So whenever you find a data set that you want to reuse or any software that you want to reuse, what license does it have? So you can check that, and then you need to check what the restrictions of that particular license are. You can also ask in Slack, for example, while the course is running, feel free to just drop a data set and we can jump in and see what the requirements are as well. And the same thing for if you're trying to reuse any sensitive data or maybe sometimes it can even be less sensitive data. Are there any ethical or legal constraints before you are able to reuse the data? Yeah, so I think with that, we'll close the session and leave it for questions. But before we do that, just want to point out that data management plans are an important tool where you can document all of these reuse issues, all of these things that you need to take into consideration before you're reusing data, all of the resources that you want to use in order to find the data, etc. You can document that in a data management plan. And so do visit the Turing Way for more details about data management plans. And I also just wanted to highlight at the end of the slides, there's a couple more resources because we had limited time, so we can't discuss everything. So there's something on data peer review, another study on data reuse. So how do reusers actually look at data that they want to reuse? So it's a very nice study. And there's 7 data quality indicators by Crystal Lewis. I'm going to skip over this just so that you are aware that this is at the end of the presentation. And Pauline Carrega also is doing a very nice presentation for Open Life Science where she goes into, I found data, but is it actually any good? So I recommend to listen to her as well. And this is the publication I've mentioned. I'm definitely not going to read this right now, but these are some excerpts from there, which I found particularly helpful. So do have a look there. All right. Then with that, thank you very much for your attention. If we still have some time for questions, and I only now see the time, then feel free to ask them. But also if you have to run off, then thanks so much for making the time to attend right now.
Yeah, thank you, Esther and Bosun. It was an amazing session, and I think each one of us, regardless of their level of knowledge or their specialization, was able to benefit from that. It's a real eye opener. And yeah, so if you guys could stick for just 10 more minutes to see if there are any questions. Yeah, Ernest, it's so captivating. Yes, indeed.
Also,
Yeah.
feedback is also welcome because this is the first time that we did it in this way. I'm normally focusing more on workshops on sharing data and not the other way around. And Bosun, I'm not sure if that's the same for you, but I actually don't think there's many workshops focusing on data reuse. So if there's any feedback on this, let us know, then we can improve.
Yeah, there's been more work and workshops on data sharing, not reuse.
I think mainly time. I think if we had more time, like maybe 2 hours, then it would have been it would have made you comfortable to expand more on so many important topics. But I think so far, so many main ideas were covered that are useful for everyone to reuse. But I'll also give the floor to the trainees to see if they have any comments. Meanwhile, also, if you, Esther and Poisson, could just tell us about what is expected for the next session, for the upcoming session. That would be great. Yeah, a lot of clapping in the chat.
Great, phew. Thanks so much. Yeah, so if you do have feedback and you don't want to share it like now and with your name and face to it, please do share it in the Google Doc. Maybe I can make a feedback section there as well. So I'll do that behind the exercise that we didn't do. So on page 5 currently it's there. So if you don't feel comfortable sharing any feedback, and I'll just add more time needed for elaboration. Feel free to adjust that. Let me see if you want to, if I haven't formulated that correctly. But yeah, we'll hopefully learn for this Friday and put a little bit less content into the workshop. And in order to prepare for the workshop, it is also helpful if you can already have a look at a README file template, and especially if you're working on your phone for the sessions, it can be helpful to already fill that out or to already have an idea that you want to discuss during the workshop itself. Because on Friday we'll be using breakout rooms and you'll be discussing this README file. So if you have nothing to discuss, then the session is not going to be very useful to you. So ideally you have already thought about it. We'll give you a little bit of time during the session to work on it as well, because we'll discuss a little bit more in detail about README files. But especially if you need more time or if you're working from your phone, I can imagine if it's a bit more comfortable to already at least look at the template and think about what would be your answers. And I'm trying to talk and find the link to the README file template. Yeah. And Lami's also already linked that one in the channel, so that's also where you can find it. So that will hopefully give you enough time for that exercise, and we'll have a little bit less exercises in the next one, I think.
If I may add something, and you can correct me, Esther, and is that it doesn't really have to be a real data set. It could be something that you just make up. I think it would ideally be like you try to make it as close as to the type of data that you usually use, then this will be helpful for you. But it doesn't have to be a real thing. It's just for exercise. Yeah.
And if it's easier, if you're reusing a data set, or if you found a README where you're wondering, oh, is this a good README file or not? If you want to use that one, then that's also fine. You don't necessarily need to use this exact template. There's multiple templates available, but we're using this one as an example. If you want to use something else, that's perfectly fine. If you want to reuse a README file that you already made at some point, also good. And then you can receive feedback on something you've already done.
Yeah, so I think there are no more questions. There are mainly happy faces
We are
in the
exhausted.
chat. No. I think everyone is really excited, not exhausted, and everyone is clapping and happy. This session was really nice and really engaging and enlightening, as Khadija said. And I think we're really looking forward for Friday, seeing you again on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
you
you.
all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you
See you
very much.
Friday.
Bye-bye.
I appreciate
See
your
you.
efforts.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.